I returned to Greybridge from an 11-day trip to London to find a "sold" sign staked crookedly into my lawn. The lock was mine, but my key wouldn't turn. It had been changed. My sister, Marla, leaned against the porch pillar, sipping a latte. "You must have missed a few emails," she smirked. "The thing is, the house was in my name, the funds wired, and there were no emails, not unless someone had intercepted them. My name is Rowan Price. I'm 32 years old, and I'm the Director of Risk Management at Maryland North's Clearwater headquarters. My job is to see the invisible threads connecting seemingly unrelated data points and calculate the probability of disaster. I model chaos for a living. I tell powerful people how the sky might fall. Right now, the sky has fallen, and it's landed squarely on my front lawn. The jet lag from the London flight is a physical thing, a low-frequency hum behind my eyes that makes the manicured green of my new neighborhood feel synthetic, like a movie set. 11 days of sterile hotel rooms, conference calls across time zones, and the recycled air of a Boeing 777 have left a film on my skin. All I wanted was the cool marble of my own shower, the familiar scent of the lavender perfume I'd ordered before I left, the simple, grounding reality of home. Instead, I got a plastic sign. "Sold," it screamed in aggressive red letters, jammed into the sod I'd paid a premium for. The broker listed beneath the word was an entity I'd never heard of. Suncoast Realty, not the agent I had spent 6 months working with, not the established firm that handled the closing just 2 months ago. This sign was an alien artifact, a declaration of a reality that wasn't mine. My hand trembled slightly as I pulled out my keys, the familiar weight doing little to reassure me. The front door, a deep navy blue I had chosen myself, looked the same. The brushed nickel handle was the same, but when I slid the key into the lock, it met a solid, unyielding obstruction. It went in maybe 1/4 of an inch and stopped. I tried again, jiggling it, a pathetic, hopeful gesture. Nothing. The tumblers were wrong. The lock had been changed. A cold spike of adrenaline cut through the fog of exhaustion. This wasn't a mistake. This was an act. And there she was, my sister, Marla, leaning against the white porch column as if she'd been waiting for this exact moment. She held a ridiculously large iced latte, condensation slicking the sides of the plastic cup, and took a long, slow sip before lowering it. A small, knowing smile played on her lips, the kind she'd perfected in high school when she'd borrowed my clothes and denied it to my face. "You must have missed a few emails," she said, her voice light, airy, completely at odds with the concrete impossibility of the situation. "What emails, Marla? My key doesn't work." My own voice sounded hollow, distant. "Things move fast in real estate, sis. You know that." She gestured vaguely at the sign with her cup. "Looks like you got a great offer." My brain, the one Maryland North paid handsomely to analyze and dissect, kicked into gear. I ignored her smirk and walked to the mailbox. It was a sturdy, black, locking mailbox. Another upgrade I'd installed myself. I used the smaller key on my ring. This one, at least, still worked. I swung the little metal door open and found nothing. It was completely empty. Not a single piece of junk mail. No flyers. No utility bills. Not even the notice for the lavender perfume delivery, the one I'd been tracking and knew should have arrived 3 days ago. An empty mailbox is more alarming than a full one. A full mailbox means you've been away. An empty one means someone has been here, intercepting your life. "Where is my mail?" I asked, turning back to her. My voice was sharper now, the fatigue burning off like morning mist. Marla shrugged, taking another noisy sip of her drink. "Maybe you put a hold on it? For the trip?" "I never put my mail on hold. I have a P.O. box for sensitive documents and let the rest accumulate. It's a habit born from paranoia, a professional hazard. Someone had rerouted my mail. Someone had changed my locks. Someone had sold my house, and my sister was standing on my porch, watching me unravel with a look of detached amusement. Just then, my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, A retiree with a meticulously kept garden and an even more meticulously kept schedule of the neighborhood's comings and goings appeared on her driveway, holding a small watering can. She waved tentatively. "Rowan, dear, you're back. We were wondering." I walked over to her low hedge, the grass cool and damp against my travel-worn flats. "Hi, Mrs. Gable. I just got in. It seems I've missed some things." I gestured over my shoulder at the sign. Her face clouded with a mixture of confusion and sympathy. "Oh, it was all so sudden. There was a truck here, the day before yesterday, I think, and men were putting a notice on your door. Something about an auction? It looked very official, but then it was gone by the evening, the same day. And then this new sign went up yesterday morning. We thought maybe you'd had to sell in a hurry." An auction notice, posted and removed in less than a day. That's not procedure. That's theater. It's designed to create a paper trail that looks legitimate at a glance, a phantom justification for a rapid, non-market transaction. The cold feeling in my gut solidified into a block of ice. I thanked Mrs. Gable, forcing a calm smile I didn't feel, and walked back to my driveway. Pulling out my phone, my fingers flew across the screen. First, my bank. The mortgage payment had been made on the 1st of the month. As always, the closing costs were all there, a neat, 6-figure debit from 2 months prior. My accounts were fine. Then, my email. I searched for Suncoast Realty, for offer, for escrow, nothing. Not in my inbox, not in my spam folder, not in my trash. It was as if the digital world agreed that this sale had never happened. There was only one thing left to do. I dialed the non-emergency number for the Graybridge Police Department. The dispatcher was bored. The officer who called me back 10 minutes later was tired. I explained the situation calmly, factually. "I am Rowan Price. This is my property. The locks have been changed without my consent. My sister is here but is not being forthcoming. I need an officer to come and grant me access to my own home." "Ma'am?" The officer sighed, the sound crackling over the phone. "We can't get involved in what sounds like a civil dispute. We can't break down a door if there's a question of tenancy or ownership." "There is no question of ownership," I insisted, my voice rising despite my efforts to keep it level. "I have the deed. I have the mortgage statements. I am the sole owner." "Your sister is there, you said? Is she on the lease or title?" "No, she's not." "Well, until you have a court order, a judge's ruling on the matter, our hands are tied. You'd need to get a locksmith, but they'll probably want to see proof of residency. And if there's a new owner on file somewhere, you see the problem. This is a matter for the courts." A civil dispute, the two words that condemn you to a slow, expensive hell of paperwork and lawyers while your life is held hostage. The system designed to protect property had just told me it couldn't help me protect mine. The call ended. I was alone, standing on the sidewalk, locked out of a life I had meticulously built. I looked at Marla, who had finished her latte and was now scrolling through her phone. The picture of nonchalance. "The police say it's a civil matter," I said, my voice flat. She looked up, not even bothering to feign surprise. "Well, that's a shame, you know," she said, tucking her phone into her back pocket. "You should really take a closer look at those financial power of attorney documents you signed before your trip. The ones for the estate planning. You were in such a rush. You probably just skimmed them." My blood ran cold. The estate planning documents, a thick stack of papers my lawyer had drawn up. I had signed them the day before I left for London. A morbid but necessary task. I had been in a rush. I had trusted my lawyer. I had trusted my sister, who I'd named as my secondary agent. Had I signed something more? A broad, sweeping authorization that could be twisted and exploited? And then, another piece clicked into place. A memory from before the trip. Gavin Vale, the CFO at Merrill and North, a man whose ambition was matched only by his opacity. He had been the one to insist on the London trip. 2 days before my flight, he had called me into his office. "Rowan, we need to extend the trip. There's a last-minute regulatory meeting in Brussels. I've already had your itinerary adjusted. You'll be gone an extra 4 days." There had been no reason for it. The meeting was tangential to my work, something that could have been handled with a video call. At the time, I'd been annoyed at the inconvenience. Now, it felt sinister. He needed me out of the country, off balance, and unreachable for a specific period. 11 days, enough time to post a phantom notice, file fraudulent paperwork, and change the locks. The jet lag was gone, burned away by pure, undiluted rage. The exhaustion had evaporated, replaced by the hyper-focused clarity I felt when dissecting a complex derivatives portfolio for hidden liabilities. My mind, my greatest asset, began to construct a new model. The variables were no longer interest rates and market volatility. They were a phony realty company, a changed lock, an empty mailbox, a complicit sister, and a CFO who had deliberately engineered my absence. Someone had stolen my identity to steal my home. The fatigue was gone. The internal audit had begun. I didn't go to a hotel. A hotel is transient, anonymous. I needed a base of operations, a place with reliable, high-speed internet and the sterile quiet of a corporate office. I drove to a 24-hour co-working space downtown, the kind favored by tech freelancers and startups, and bought a weekly pass with my personal credit card. I found a small, glass-walled office, plugged in my laptop, and took a deep, steadying breath. The faint smell of whiteboard cleaner and stale coffee was more comforting than any hotel potpourri. My home was a crime scene. This was my war room. The first front in this war was my email. Marla's taunt about missed emails wasn't just a taunt. It was a clue. It was the loose thread, and I was going to pull it until the entire fabrication unraveled. I logged into my personal email account, my fingers moving with practiced speed. The inbox looked normal at first glance, a curated collection of newsletters, online shopping receipts, and personal correspondence, but it felt too clean, too quiet. I knew there should have been a flurry of notifications about the attempted delivery of my perfume, flight check-in reminders, bank alerts. They were all missing. My cursor hovered over the gear icon for settings, then clicked. I navigated to the forwarding and pop IMAP tab, and there it was, a single, damning line of text that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Forward a copy of incoming mail to GV Stoneloom, consulting at protonmail.com, and delete Rowan Price's copy. GV Stoneloom Consulting. It wasn't just a forward. It was a complete hijack. Every email sent to me for the past 2 weeks had been instantly rerouted to this anonymous address and then erased from my own server, leaving no trace. They had been reading my life in real time while I was 4,000 miles away, sipping bad airplane coffee. The violation was intimate, absolute. They hadn't just entered my house. They had crawled inside my digital life and sat there, watching. I took a screenshot, saved it to a secure drive, and disabled the rule. The emails I had missed wouldn't come flooding back. They were gone forever from my end. But the digital ghost was now on my radar. If they had redirected my email, they had almost certainly redirected my physical mail to complete the information blockade. I opened a new tab and went to the United States Postal Service website. Under the Track and Manage section, I clicked Informed Delivery and then looked for any active forwarding orders. There it was, a temporary mail forwarding request, filed online 11 days ago, the very day my flight took off for London. The destination was a P&O box in a neighboring town. To file an online request, you need to verify your identity. The site listed the verification method, inputting my valid Florida driver's license number, a number Marla would know where to find, a number she could have easily photographed months ago, another screenshot, another piece of evidence saved. They had built a paper wall around me, diverting every bill, every notice, every official document that could have warned me. Next, the money. Financial transactions are the bedrock of any fraud. They can't happen without leaving a footprint. I logged into my primary checking account, the one tied to the house. I set the date range to the past 3 weeks and began exporting the statements as PDFs. I didn't look for large, obvious withdrawals. This was a sophisticated theft, not a smash and grab. They would have hidden their tracks in the minutiae. I scanned the transaction descriptions, my eyes moving past the mortgage debits, the utility auto payments, the grocery bills, and then I saw it. A charge from 8 days ago for $150. The description was innocuous. Courier and recording fee. Most people would ignore it, assuming it was a bank charge or some automated expense, but I knew what it was. It was the cost of making a fraudulent transaction legally binding. The payee was a company I had never heard of. Hollow Pine Title, Inc. A title company, the neutral third party that handles the closing of a real estate sale. The escrow agent. A legitimate sale would have used the large, reputable firm I closed with. A fraudulent one would use a boutique, possibly complicit, agency. A quick search for Hollow Pine Title revealed a bare-bones website with a single stock photo of smiling professionals and a PEO box address. They were a ghost, created for a single purpose, but they had given me the most important piece of information yet: a name. With that name, I went to the Pinellas County property appraiser and clerk of the court's official records portal. This was the source of truth, the public ledger where every transaction, every lien, every deed is recorded and time-stamped. I typed my own name into the search field. The recent history loaded. There was my original warranty deed from 2 months ago, a clean title transfer from the previous owners to me, and then, filed just 6 days ago, was a new entry. Document type: quitclaim deed. My blood turned to ice. A warranty deed guarantees the seller owns the property and has the right to sell it. A quitclaim deed does no such thing. It simply transfers the owner's interest, whatever it may be, to a new party. It offers no protection for the buyer. It is a fast, cheap, and dirty way to move a title, and it's the preferred instrument of fraudsters everywhere. It was a legal confession. I clicked the link to view the scanned document. The PDF loaded. A grainy, black-and-white image of a single-page form. The grantor was listed as Rowan P. Price, my full legal name. The grantee was Stoneloom Holdings, LLC, and there, at the bottom of the page, was my signature, or a hauntingly accurate facsimile of it. Beside it was the stamp of a notary public. The notary's name was listed, and the commission expired in 3 years. The location of the notarization: a 24/7 print and copy shop on the other side of the county, a place I had never set foot in. The timestamp was for 10:47 p.m., 5 days ago, while I was asleep in a hotel in London. The document included a scanned copy of the ID presented to the notary. It was a Florida driver's license, my driver's license. The photo was mine, but it was blurry, overexposed, as if it had been photographed from a screen. The signature on the deed was nearly perfect. It had my loops, my spacing, the exact cadence of my hand. But as I zoomed in, I saw the tell. I always sign my name with a heavy, deliberate downstroke on the vertical line of the R in Rowan. A small, aggressive tick of ink. It was a habit from years of signing thousands of documents, a way of anchoring my name to the page. This signature was fluid, practiced, but it lacked that pressure point. It was a careful drawing, not an unconscious act. It was a forgery. This still didn't explain how they could justify the transfer. There had to be a pretext. I went back to the county records and searched again, this time for any liens filed against the property, and there it was, filed 3 days before the quitclaim deed. A notice of HOA lien from my homeowners association for an absurdly high, made-up sum for unpaid emergency assessments. It was a complete fabrication, designed to create the illusion of a distressed property that needed to be offloaded quickly, a rationale for the use of a quitclaim deed to settle a non-existent debt. Finally, I focused on the beneficiary, Stoneloom Holdings, LLC. I opened the Florida Division of Corporations database, Sunbiz, and searched the name. The LLC was brand new, formed only 3 weeks ago. Its address was a P.O. box. It had all the hallmarks of a classic shell company, a legal entity created to obscure the identity of its owners. But by law, every LLC had to list a registered agent, a person designated to receive official correspondence. I clicked on the filing details, and my breath caught in my chest. Registered agent. G. Vale.
G. Vale.
The same initials from the ghost email account, the same last name as my boss, my CFO, Gavin Vale, a man notorious for his use of shell companies and offshore accounts in his corporate dealings. A man who had deliberately extended my business trip. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a confirmation. I leaned back in the cheap office chair, the hum of the building's air conditioning filling the silence. The digital walls they had built around me were an illusion. They thought they had created a fortress of paper and ghost emails. But what they had actually done was create a blueprint of their crime. And I, Rowan Price, the director of risk, was the one person perfectly qualified to read it. The co-working space was beginning to fill up, the morning quiet giving way to the clatter of keyboards and the low murmur of conference calls. For me, the outside world had ceased to exist. I was no longer a woman locked out of her house. I was a risk director analyzing a hostile takeover of a key asset. The asset just happened to be my life, my mind, now fully detached from the emotional shock, had shifted into its natural state, a cold, methodical audit. And the next phase of that audit had to take place on my home turf, the Maryland North Corporate Network. I logged into the company VPN, the multi-factor authentication process, a familiar, comforting ritual. The irony was corrosive. Here I was, a key architect of Maryland North's anti-money laundering, AML, and Know Your Customer, KYC policies. And I was staring at a textbook case of a shell company being used to launder a stolen asset, my house. Stoneloom Holdings, LLC was an amateur construct, a cheap, off-the-shelf ghost. I had written the very compliance manuals that detailed how to spot such entities. The recent incorporation date, the use of a PEO box as a primary address, the generic name, the single registered agent. Gavin had used my own playbook against me. He had assumed I would be too blinded by personal distress to see the professional pattern. He had assumed wrong. My job is to see the pattern first. My focus sharpened. Gavin. Everything flowed from him. His motives, his methods, his connections. I started pulling threads, not from public records, but from the vast proprietary data archives of Maryland North. I began with his recent corporate initiatives. For the past quarter, Gavin had been aggressively championing the acquisition of a small, obscure data analytics startup called GeoVerity. Their supposed innovation was an algorithm that scraped municipal records, social media, and satellite imagery to create predictive models for real estate valuation and risk. Gavin's pitch to the board, which I had reviewed, was that GeoVerity would revolutionize our real estate investment portfolio by optimizing due diligence. At the time, I had flagged it as a solution in search of a problem, an expensive and redundant tool. Our existing systems were more than adequate, but Gavin had pushed it through with unusual force, overriding my department's lukewarm assessment. Now, his obsession made a terrifying kind of sense. He wasn't just buying a company, he was acquiring a toolkit for identifying and assessing properties for purposes far beyond our corporate portfolio. Then, a more personal memory surfaced, slippery and unsettling. The day before my London flight, I was in a frantic rush, clearing my desk, finalizing reports. Gavin had stopped by my office, a rare occurrence. He'd leaned against the doorframe, projecting an aura of casual concern. "Rowan, I know you're swamped," he'd said. "That estate planning stuff you mentioned? Don't forget to get it done. And if you need a quick temporary power of attorney for any minor things while you're away, just in case, have legal draw one up. Use Chloe. She's quick. She can get it done in an hour." Chloe Ronson, a junior legal assistant in our internal counsel's office, efficient, quiet, and while, as I now remembered with a jolt, someone Marla knew. They had worked together for a year at a small downtown law firm before Chloe came to Maryland North. Marla had been the one who told me Chloe was looking for a new job, a detail that meant nothing then, but felt like a critical piece of a conspiracy now. I had followed Gavin's advice. It seemed practical. I had been too busy to go through the usual channels. so I'd asked Chloe to draft a limited temporary power of attorney, strictly for handling any unforeseen issues with the house utilities or HOA while I was unreachable. I had signed it in a hurry. How broad was the language she had used? How easily could it be twisted or used as a template for a more powerful, fraudulent document? On instinct, I opened the internal employee directory and searched for Chloe Ronson. Her profile popped up, but the status indicator next to her name was gray, not green. Terminated, the entry read. Voluntary resignation, last day, last Friday. My fingers flew to my keyboard, opening a new browser tab. I went to her LinkedIn profile. It was already updated. Her new position: lead paralegal and closing coordinator. Her new employer: Hollow Pine Title, Inc. The connection was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. The legal assistant Gavin had personally recommended, the one with a direct link to my sister, had quit her stable corporate job the week I was away to go work for the ghost escrow company that had processed the theft of my house. This wasn't a series of unfortunate coincidences. This was a meticulously planned operation with internal assets. My own company's infrastructure was being used against me. The thought was galling. As a director, I had high-level administrative access to certain system logs, a privilege granted for compliance and security oversight. I was about to use it for personal reasons, a clear violation of policy, but the circumstances felt exceptional. I navigated to the IT services portal, entered my credentials, and pulled the access logs for my own employee profile for the last 30 days. I wanted to see who had been looking at my data. The list was short: my own logins, a few automated system processes, and one entry that made my blood run cold. 15 days ago, 2 days after my trip was booked but before it was extended, Gavin Vale had personally granted a new external vendor account temporary, read-only access to the travel and scheduling data for select senior staff. My name was at the top of that list. The vendor's name was listed as Aurelius Testing Solutions. It sounded official, bland, and utterly fake. It was a digital ghost. A backdoor opened by the CFO himself to monitor my exact location and confirm my absence. He had watched my calendar to know exactly when to strike. A memory of Marla, from a few months back, surfaced unbidden. We were having a rare, strained dinner. She had been complaining about her job, her apartment, her life. I had offered some sisterly advice, which she'd taken, as usual, as condescending criticism. "You don't get it, Rowan," she'd snapped, swirling the ice in her drink. "You think because you have your fancy title and your big salary, you know everything. But I'm seeing someone now, someone who really gets it, someone who understands how money actually works, way better than you." At the time, I'd dismissed it as a petty jab. Now, the words echoed with sinister meaning. Someone who understands how money actually works. Someone like a chief financial officer. Someone like Gavin Vale. The stray comment, the legal assistant, the startup acquisition, the extended trip, the shell company bearing his name. They weren't separate data points anymore. They were a constellation, and at its center was a toxic alliance between my CFO and my sister. Gavin provided the corporate machinery and the financial acumen. Marla provided the personal details, my habits, my signature, my trust. He was the architect, she was the key. I closed the VPN connection. The hum of the co-working space faded into the background. The initial frantic phase of discovery was over. The rage was still there, a white-hot coal in my chest, but it was now contained, controlled. It was fuel. They had played this game using deception and personal betrayal. I would play it using the rules of my profession. Merrill and North had taught me that the only effective response to risk is a controlled, evidence-based strategy. There would be no dramatic confrontations, no tearful accusations. Drama creates ambiguity. I needed certainty. I needed an unshakable foundation of facts. My new mission was clear. I would collect, document, and preserve every piece of evidence. I would establish a chain of custody for every digital artifact. I would build a case so logical, so airtight, and so irrefutable that it would dismantle their paper walls and drag their conspiracy into the harsh, unforgiving light. The game wasn't about getting my house back anymore. It was about taking everything from them. The first step in dismantling a conspiracy is to report the crime, not for justice, not for sympathy, but for a piece of paper, a case number, an official, state-sanctioned acknowledgement that a violation has occurred. I drove from the co-working space to the main precinct of the Graybridge Police Department, the same one that had dismissed me over the phone hours earlier. This time, I didn't call. I walked in. I didn't ask for an officer to help me break into my house. I asked to file a formal report for identity theft and real property fraud. The officer at the desk was impassive, but the specific, technical nature of my request moved me out of the category of a hysterical victim and into a different queue. I was led to a small, sterile room where a detective who looked as weary as I felt took my statement. I didn't give him theories or accusations about my sister or my boss. I gave him facts, chronologically, and provided the printouts I had already made. The screenshot of the email forwarding rule, the USPS mail forwarding confirmation, the fraudulent quitclaim deed from the county clerk's website, the fabricated HOA lien. I presented a narrative of digital and documentary theft. He listened, he typed, and at the end, he handed me a slip of paper with a case number on it, Report GPD 25-417. It was the first brick in my foundation. It made the crime real in the eyes of the system. With the report number secured, my next move was containment. My house might have been taken, but my financial identity was still a battlefield. In the car, before even driving away from the precinct, I initiated a three-front defense. I called Equifax, then Experian, then TransUnion, to each automated system, and eventually, to each live agent. I recited the same script. I am placing a fraud alert and a credit freeze on my account. I have a police report for identity theft. Case number GPD 25-083417. A fraud alert would flag any new credit applications in my name, forcing lenders to take extra steps to verify my identity. A credit freeze was a fortress. It would lock down my credit file entirely, making it impossible for anyone to open a new line of credit in my name. I emailed a scanned copy of the police report to their fraud departments for documentation. The walls were now up. The breach was contained. My next call was to the Florida Department of State, the Division of Corporations, which oversees the state's notary board. I reported the fraudulent notarization on the quitclaim deed, providing the notary's name and commission number directly from the document. The agent on the other end of the line was professional and grave. She took the information and then, as I had anticipated, contacted the notary himself for his official response. 20 minutes later, she called me back. Mr. Henderson states he followed all procedures, she said, her voice neutral. He claims he met with an individual who presented a valid Florida driver's license with your name and photo. He recorded the transaction in his official log. I was in London, I stated calmly. I have airline tickets, hotel receipts, and passport stamps to prove it. The ID he was shown was fraudulent. He is adamant. I understand, I said. The notarization took place at a 24-hour print shop. Such establishments have security cameras for liability purposes. Please have your investigator formally request the complete video logs for the interior and exterior of that location from 10:00 p.m. to midnight on that date. The footage will show that the person who signed that document was not me. I wasn't asking her to believe me. I was pointing her toward irrefutable proof. She agreed to add the request to the official investigation file. Another gear was now turning, this one outside of my direct control. While the state began its own slow process, I initiated a far more aggressive legal maneuver. I retained a real estate attorney, a pit bull of a man recommended by one of my firm's senior partners, and instructed him to do one thing immediately: file a lis pendens. It's a Latin term meaning suit pending, and in the world of real estate, it is a weapon of mutually assured destruction. It's a public notice, filed with the county clerk and attached to the property's title record, declaring that the property is the subject of an ongoing lawsuit. With a lis pendens attached to its title, my house was now radioactive, No bank would finance it, no buyer would touch it, and no title insurance company would cover it. Stoneloom Holdings LLC, or Gavin, could not sell it, borrow against it, or transfer it to another shell company. They were trapped. The asset they had stolen was now frozen, a worthless entry on their phantom balance sheet. The signature on the deed was the cornerstone of their fraud. I had to demolish it. I found a court-certified forensic document examiner, a woman who had spent 20 years with the FBI, and I overnighted her a packet containing a high-resolution scan of the forged deed and 10 samples of my genuine signature from various documents over the past 5 years. Her preliminary analysis came back 2 days later in a password-protected email. The subject signature on the quitclaim deed is a simulated forgery, she wrote. There is evidence of tracing, visible in the unnatural uniformity of pen pressure and the absence of idiosyncratic pen lifts and hesitation marks present in the known exemplars. Note the initial stroke of the capital R in the first name. The known signatures all exhibit a significant pressure increase on the downstroke, a subconscious habit. This pressure point is absent in the questioned signature, which maintains a consistent, light pressure throughout. The signature is a careful drawing, not a dynamic writing event. It was the scientific confirmation of what my gut had told me. The forgery was skilled, but it was lifeless. It was a ghost. Next, I targeted the enablers. Hollow Pine Title was not just a name on a form. It was a licensed, state-regulated entity. They had a duty of care, a responsibility to ensure transactions were legitimate. They had failed, likely by design. I went to the website for the Florida Department of Financial Services and filed a detailed, formal complaint against the company and its registered agent. I accused them of gross negligence, of facilitating a fraudulent transfer, and of conspiracy to commit real property fraud. I attached the police report, the forged deed, and a copy of the new lis pendens. A state-level complaint triggers an automatic audit. At best, they were incompetent. At worst, they were complicit. Either way, their business was now under a microscope. The final piece of the puzzle was the most delicate. I needed to definitively link the email interception to Gavin himself. The GV, Stoneloom, consulting address was suggestive, but it wasn't proof. I needed the digital DNA. I needed the full, extended header from one of the emails that had been forwarded. The header is like a digital postmark, containing a log of the servers the email passed through on its journey, including the IP address of the origin. I knew I couldn't use company resources for this, but I had a friend, Ben, in our IT forensics department. I met him for coffee, far from the office. Ben, I have a weird personal security question, I began, framing it as a hypothetical. Let's say I think someone created a forwarding rule on my personal email without my permission. If I could get just one of the original forwarded emails from the recipient, could I trace it back? Could I see where the rule was set up from? He nodded slowly, sipping his espresso. If you have the full header, yeah. The header logs the IP address of the client that initiated the forwarding. You could potentially trace that IP back to a specific location or internet service provider. It's not easy, but it's possible. Why? I have a family issue, I said, which was technically true. Someone is trying to make me look irresponsible. I just need to prove it. I sent him a secure, encrypted message with the Proton Mail address. If you could just tell me what to look for, what the key data points in a header are, that's all I need. Ben, a wizard who loved a puzzle, sent me a detailed guide an hour later on how to analyze an email header. Now I just needed the email. That would be the hardest part. Throughout this entire process, the police reports, the credit freezes, the legal filings, I maintained complete and total silence. I didn't answer Marla's single, gloating text message. Hope you found a place to stay. I didn't respond to the 2 perfectly professional, utterly disingenuous emails Gavin sent to my work address about the London trip debrief. I let them exist in the comfortable reality they had created for themselves. I let them believe they had won. People only get careless when they feel secure. They only leave evidence trails when they think no one is looking, and they only confess in their own way, when they believe they hold all the cards. My silence was not passive. It was strategic. It was the quiet before the storm. I chose the Norwood Hotel bar for a reason. It's a place of quiet power, all dark wood, supple leather, and low, strategic lighting. The kind of lighting that forces you to lean in, to study the face across the table, to catch the flicker of a lie in a person's eyes before they have a chance to conceal it. It's a place where deals are made and secrets are kept, and tonight, a secret was going to be revealed. I arrived first, chose a small, secluded booth, and ordered a club soda with lime. I was calm, my pulse a steady, metronomic beat. I was not here to fight with my sister. I was here to conduct a final damage assessment before raising the entire structure to the ground. Marla arrived 10 minutes late, a deliberate power move. She swept into the bar wearing a new silk blouse I didn't recognize and carrying a designer bag I knew for a fact she couldn't afford. She looked radiant, energized, as if shedding the burden of a less successful older sister had done wonders for her complexion. She slid into the booth opposite me, her smile a bright, brittle thing. "The Norwood," she said, her eyes sweeping the room with an air of proprietary approval. "Classy, celebrating your new, unencumbered lifestyle?" "I wanted a neutral space to talk," I said, my voice even. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Oh, Rowan, nothing with you is ever neutral. It's always about control, isn't it? Every little thing has to be managed, assessed, put in its proper box. You know, for a while I almost felt bad. But then I realized, this is a lesson you needed to learn. Some things are outside of your control. You needed to be humbled." I let her words hang in the air, studying her. She was performing, delivering a pre-written script to justify the unjustifiable. She believed it, or at least she wanted to. It was the only way she could live with herself. She was casting herself as the agent of my enlightenment, the teacher of a harsh but necessary lesson. I took a slow sip of my club soda, the sharp fizz of the carbonation a small, grounding sensation. "Is that what this is?" I asked, my voice genuinely curious. "A lesson in humility?" "It's a market correction," she said, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You had everything, always. The grades, the career, the perfect little life you were building. You never once stopped to think if anyone else deserved a piece of it. You just took it. So someone else took something back. It's the way of the world." She was confessing, cloaking it in a flimsy philosophy of cosmic fairness. She was admitting to the crime while simultaneously absolving herself of the guilt. It was a beautiful, pathological performance. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to sit with her own pronouncement. She shifted uncomfortably, her bravado faltering slightly in the absence of a reaction. "I have a question for you, Marla," I said finally, keeping my tone level, conversational. "It's just a name I came across. Stoneloom Holdings." The name landed on the table between us. I watched her face in the carefully curated light. It was a masterclass in micro-expressions. A flicker of panic in her eyes, instantly suppressed, a fractional tightening of her jaw, a slight, almost imperceptible intake of breath. She recovered in a heartbeat, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Stoneloom Holdings?" she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "Sounds rich. Can't say I've heard of it." Her denial was too quick, too smooth. She had rehearsed this. I didn't respond. Instead, I slowly reached for my phone, which had been lying face down on the table. I unlocked it, navigated to my photo gallery, and selected an image. Without a word, I turned the phone around and slid it across the smooth, dark wood of the table. It was a screenshot of a text message exchange. The contact at the top was listed simply as G. The messages were from 2 weeks ago. Her. "Confirming she's wheels up at 10:45. The window is open." G. "Paperwork is staged. Chloe is ready. Just need the final go-ahead." Her. "She signed the utility POA without even reading it. She trusts me." G. "Perfect. Wire instructions for the 3.5% success fee will be sent to you upon recording of the deed. Marla stared at the screen. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin looking pale and thin under the bar's amber lights. The confident, radiant woman who had walked in a few minutes ago was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. That's nothing," she stammered, trying to laugh it off. The sound was hollow, fragile. "That's a joke. Gavin and we have a weird sense of humor. We were just role-playing, making fun of your corporate world." I didn't say anything. I just tapped my finger on the last message on the screen, the one that mentioned the money. "A 3.5% success fee," I said softly. "That's a very specific joke." Her hand, which had been reaching for her water glass, froze midair. It was the tell, the involuntary physical reaction that betrayed the conscious mind's frantic attempts to lie. Her body knew the truth. The success fee was real. She stared at my finger, then back at the screen, and in that moment, the last of her manufactured confidence crumbled. "If I fight you for the house, Marla, I lose," I said, my voice dropping lower, pulling her in. "It's a civil matter. Just like the police said, it would take months, maybe years. Lawyers would get rich. It would be a slow, ugly, draining war of attrition. Even if I won, I'd lose. You know that. That's what you and Gavin were counting on." I leaned forward, closing the distance between us. "But I'm not fighting for the house anymore. I'm fighting for the narrative. And in that fight, you lose. If this story gets out, not the legal story, but the real story, what happens to you? To your friendships? To any hope of a career? What happens to Gavin, the CFO of a publicly traded financial institution, when the story is about how he conspired with an employee's sister to steal her home using a shell company and forged documents? That's not a civil matter. That's a career-ending, reputation-destroying, potentially criminal narrative." She found a sliver of her old defiance. She pulled her hand back and snatched the phone, pushing it back across the table at me. "You have nothing," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "A screenshot? A silly text? That's not evidence. It's not admissible. My lawyer will tear you apart. Gavin's lawyers will bury you. You have no proof that a court would ever accept." She still thought we were playing the same game. She thought the rules were about courtrooms and judges and admissibility. She had no idea that I had already moved the game to an entirely new board. I didn't pick up my phone. I left it on the table as I slowly gathered my purse and slid out of the booth. I stood up, looking down at her. She looked small now, diminished, the expensive blouse and handbag suddenly looking like a costume she could no longer pull off. "You're right," I said, and the simple agreement seemed to confuse her more than anything. "You should hold on to that thought." I paused, letting the final blow hang in the air for a moment before I delivered it. "I have an all-hands meeting tomorrow morning. The entire company. It's a quarterly risk and compliance update. Gavin is giving the keynote. You should watch the live stream. It might be educational." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel her stare burning into my back. A frantic, desperate heat, as the true nature of my plan, the sheer, public audacity of it, began to dawn on her. The game wasn't about a quiet title. It was about a very, very loud truth. The Skyview Auditorium at the Merrill and North headquarters is a theater of corporate power. It's a vast, tiered space with seating for 500, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that offer a panoramic, godlike view of Clearwater Bay. This morning, it was packed. The air hummed with the quiet chatter of a company gathered for its quarterly all-hands meeting. I sat in the third row, an island of cold calm in a sea of professional ambition. My laptop was on my lap, its screen dark. The presentation was loaded, cached, and ready. Gavin Vale walked onto the stage to polite applause. He looked impeccable in a tailored charcoal suit, the very picture of a confident CFO. He smiled, a wide, easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stood at the podium, the enormous Merrill and North logo projected behind him like a halo. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice smooth and resonant. "It's an exciting quarter for us. We're not just navigating the market, we're anticipating it, we're innovating, and a key part of that innovation is our new strategic focus on data-driven real estate analysis." He clicked a remote, and a slide with the logo for GeoVerity, the startup he'd acquired, appeared on the massive screen. He spent the next 15 minutes talking about synergies, predictive analytics, and optimizing our asset portfolio. He was articulate, persuasive, and utterly oblivious. He was delivering the prologue to his own execution. "Finally," he finished. "And now, for an update on our compliance framework, I'll hand it over to our Director of Risk, Rowan Price." I stood up and walked toward the stage, my footsteps silent on the thick carpeting. I could feel Gavin's eyes on me, a flicker of something, annoyance, curiosity, at my lack of response to his emails. I shook the COO's hand, nodded to Gavin, and stood at the podium. It was smaller than it looked from the audience. "Thank you, Gavin," I said, my voice clear and steady through the microphone. "The planned presentation on regulatory updates has been circulated to you all by email. I'm sure you'll find it riveting." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. "Instead, with the COO's permission, I'd like to take 10 minutes to walk you through a brief, real-world case study on asset appropriation fraud. It's a practical application of the very risks we're tasked with mitigating." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the COO, a sharp woman named Elizabeth Cho, nod slightly. She was intrigued. Gavin's smile had become fixed. I clicked the remote in my hand. The GeoVerity logo vanished, replaced by a high-resolution photograph that filled the entire screen. It was my house, my lawn, with the crooked, red "Sold" sign stabbed into the grass. A wave of whispers washed over the auditorium. It was a shocking, personal image, completely out of context for a corporate meeting. People were leaning forward, pointing, talking to their neighbors. They recognized the house. I had hosted a team barbecue there a month after I moved in. I let the image sit there for a full 10 seconds before I spoke. "This is the end result of the fraud," I said simply. "Now, let's examine the architecture." Click, the next slide appeared. It was a flowchart, a clean corporate diagram that a risk analyst would make. On the left was a box labeled Stoneloom Holdings LLC, with bullet points beneath it. Incorporated 3 weeks ago. P.O. Box address. Registered agent. G. Vale. An arrow connected it to a box in the middle labeled Hollow Pine Title, Inc. Chloe Ronson's new employer. Another arrow connected that box to a third, labeled Internal Vendor ID, Aurelius Testing Solutions. Finally, a dotted line connected all three to a destination, an anonymized email address, GV, Stoneloom, consulting@protonmail.com. "As our AML policies state," I explained, my tone becoming professorial, "a shell company is often the primary vehicle for illicit transactions. It creates a layer of anonymity. What is unusual in this case study is the direct link between the shell company, the escrow agent, and a vendor account created within our own network to monitor an employee's travel schedule." I saw Gavin's knuckles turn white where he gripped the edge of his chair in the front row. Click, the next slide was split into 2 sections. On the left was a screenshot of the USPS mail forwarding confirmation, time-stamped the morning of my flight to London. On the right was a simplified data log. The perpetrator initiated the fraud by isolating the target. This was achieved by creating an unauthorized mail forward and, more critically, an email interception rule. The digital trail is precise. The rule was created on October 4th at 9:17 a.m. from an IP address that geolocates to a private office in this very building. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. This action coincided perfectly with an externally created vendor account being granted access to my travel itinerary, an access request that was personally approved by our CFO. I didn't look at Gavin, but I could feel the heat of 500 pairs of eyes turning toward him. Click, The final slide. The one that mattered. It was a still frame from a high-definition security camera. The image was clear. Taken from a slight downward angle, it showed Chloe Ronson, our former legal assistant, standing at the counter of the print shop, sliding a document and a driver's license toward a notary. Her face was unmistakable. Next to that image, I had placed my own corporate ID photo. The contrast was absolute, undeniable. The caption below the two images was simple, stark, and written in a large, bold font, the signatory versus the asset holder. The room fell into a dead, stunned silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. In that silence, I leaned into the microphone. "When you believe risk is just theater," I said, my voice low but carrying to every corner of the hall. "It has a tendency to play out on the biggest possible stage." Gavin's face was ashen. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He half stood, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The company's general counsel, a man named Marcus Thorne, shot up from his seat. "This is highly irregular," he said, his voice booming with forced authority. "This is not the proper forum for whatever this is. We need to stop this presentation immediately." Heads turned toward the COO. Elizabeth Cho hadn't moved. She looked from Gavin's stricken face to the screen, then to me. Her expression was like granite. She raised a hand, silencing Marcus. "No," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Let her finish." It was the single most powerful moment of my career. It was a public validation. It was permission. I turned back to the audience, my gaze sweeping across the rows of shocked faces. "Mr. Thorne is right. This is not the proper forum for a personal grievance," I said, my voice resonating with a newfound authority. But this was never just a personal grievance. This was a case study of a catastrophic failure in our internal controls, executed by a senior executive. We need to call this what it is, using the language of our profession. I clicked the remote one last time. A final slide appeared, a single sentence in the middle of the screen. I read it aloud. "We call this insider threat, a fundamental conflict of interest, and the gross misuse of corporate resources and employee data for personal enrichment. Thank you." I placed the remote on the podium, turned, and walked off the stage, leaving the slide hanging in the charged air behind me. The silence held for a moment longer before the entire auditorium erupted into a chaotic explosion of sound. My work here was done. The ambush was complete. I didn't go back to my desk. I went to a small, glass-walled conference room adjacent to the auditorium and waited. The chaos from the all-hands meeting was a muted roar through the soundproofed walls. I didn't have to wait long. 5 minutes later, the door opened and Marcus Thorne, the general counsel, walked in, followed by Elizabeth Cho, the COO. Marcus's face was a mask of grim professionalism. Elizabeth's was unreadable. "Sit down, Rowan," Marcus said. It wasn't a request. He closed the door, and the roar from outside was cut to a whisper. He looked at me, not with anger, but with the weary resignation of a man whose day had just been irrevocably ruined. "First things first, as of this moment, you are officially classified as a whistleblower under the company's internal protection policy and all applicable federal statutes. You are not to be retaliated against in any way. Your job is secure. Any communication regarding this matter from anyone in the company is to be routed through my office. Understood?" I nodded. Understood. "Secondly," he continued, placing his briefcase on the table, "our internal forensics team is already securing Gavin Vale's office, his network access, and all relevant server logs. They will report directly to me, but they will require your full cooperation. You will be their primary witness and subject matter expert." Elizabeth finally spoke, her voice quiet, but carrying immense weight. "You took an incredible risk, Rowan. You bypassed every protocol. You exposed this company to significant public embarrassment." She paused, and I met her gaze without flinching. "You also did the right thing. You upheld the ethical standard this company claims to represent, even when one of its senior officers failed to. For that, you have my gratitude." Before I could respond, Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "They're here," he said to Elizabeth. He looked at me. "Stay in this room. Someone from my team will be with you shortly." He and Elizabeth left, and I was alone again in the silent, glass box. I walked to the window, which overlooked the main atrium lobby 3 floors below. It was all happening just as I had modeled it. The initial shock, the corporate self-preservation instinct kicking in, and then the swift, decisive action. From my vantage point, I saw them, 4 people in dark suits, 2 men and 2 women, entering the lobby. They didn't look like cops, not in the uniformed sense. They moved with the quiet, unhurried confidence of federal agents. They were met by Marcus, who handed them a folder. One of them spoke into a radio, and a moment later, 2 uniformed Graybridge police officers entered and stood by the main doors. The company was now a crime scene. I watched as 2 of the investigators, led by our head of corporate security, got into the elevator. They were going up, to the executive floor, to Gavin's office. The warrant would be served not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating finality of a legal document being placed on a polished mahogany desk. The fallout was immediate and cascaded through the system with brutal efficiency. My newly appointed counsel, a sharp, no-nonsense woman from Marcus's team named Dana, kept me updated with a series of terse, single-line emails. 11:15 a.m. Court order served on Stoneloom Holdings Bank. All accounts frozen. Pending investigation. An outgoing wire transfer to a personal account belonging to Marla Price has been flagged and suspended by the bank's AML compliance department. The success fee, they had caught it mid-flight. Marla's payday had vanished into a legal black hole. 11:45 a.m. Florida Department of Financial Services has issued an emergency suspension of Hollow Pine Title's operating license, citing the formal complaint and ongoing law enforcement activity. Their offices are being sealed. Chloe Ronson's new career had lasted less than a week. 12:30 p.m. State Notary Board investigator has served a subpoena on Notary Public Robert Henderson. His logbook and electronic records have been seized. The quiet man from the 24/7 print shop was now a material witness in a felony fraud investigation. The most satisfying update, however, came not in an email, but as a photo sent to my phone from my real estate lawyer. It was a picture of my house. 2 men from the phony Suncoast Realty were in the process of pulling the sold sign out of my lawn. The caption from my lawyer read, "Escrow company sent a formal notice of rescission due to substantiated claims of fraud. They're running for the hills. The house is yours again. Legally. It never wasn't." I stared at the picture of the sign, tilted at a pathetic angle, its fraudulent proclamation now just a piece of garbage. I felt a tremor of something, a feeling I couldn't quite name. It wasn't joy. It was the grim satisfaction of a problem being solved. Just then, my phone rang. The caller ID was Marla. I let it ring twice, took a deep breath, and enabled the recording app I had downloaded that morning. I answered, putting the phone on speaker. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice raw with panic and fury. "What the hell did you do? Rowan?" "I presented a case study," I said calmly. "They froze my account. The bank just called me. They're asking questions. This was supposed to be easy. He said it was perfect." And then I heard his voice in the background, muffled but clear, tight with panic. It was Gavin. He was with her. "Shut up, Marla! Get off the phone!" he was yelling. Then, his voice closer, more urgent, directed at her but captured perfectly by my phone's microphone. "Listen to me. Delete everything. The entire chat history. Now, go to the P.O. box this afternoon and clear it out. Take everything and burn it. Do you understand me? Burn it." "The police are going to call me," Marla cried. "They have nothing on you unless you talk. Just say you knew nothing. Say Rowan is lying. Say she's vindictive. Deny everything. It's her word against ours." I hung up. My hands were perfectly steady. I saved the audio file, a 47-second clip of pure, undiluted criminal conspiracy, and intent to destroy evidence. They had just handed me the nail for their own coffin. I didn't email the file. I didn't text it. I walked out of the conference room and found Dana, my counsel, in the hallway. "I have something you need to see, or rather, hear," I said. We went into her office. I explained the call. She didn't react, her face impassive. "Transfer the file directly to my laptop," she instructed. "Do not make any copies. We will establish a chain of custody right now." I connected my phone, and she copied the M4A file to a secure, encrypted folder, renaming it with the case number and the exact time and date. She then created a hash value for the file to prove it hadn't been altered. Every step was by the book, preserving the recording's integrity for when it would be presented as evidence. "This is a gift," she said, looking at the file name on her screen. "An instruction to destroy evidence is a consciousness of guilt. This is what prosecutors dream of." She stood up. "I need to get this to the lead investigator immediately." She left, and I stood alone in her office. I looked out her window, down at the bay, where sailboats drifted on the calm. Blue water. For the first time since I'd landed from London. For the first time since I'd seen that crooked sign on my lawn. I felt the knot in my chest loosen. I took a breath that felt like it reached the bottom of my lungs. A wave of exhaustion, profound and heavy, washed over me. It was a victory, clean, swift, and total. But as I stood there, watching the indifferent beauty of the day, I knew this wasn't the end. The battle was won, but the war, the long, ugly process of depositions, hearings, and the final, inevitable family reckoning was just beginning. The legal battle for my home wasn't a battle at all. It was a demolition. While the criminal investigation against Gavin and Marla moved at the deliberate, methodical pace of the state, the civil action to reclaim my title moved at the speed of irrefutable truth. My attorney, a man who relished the cold mechanics of the law, filed a petition for a quiet title action. It's a lawsuit designed to do exactly what its name implies, to silence any and all competing claims to a piece of property, leaving one clear, undisputed owner. It's a legal declaration that says, "This is mine. The story ends here." Attached to our petition was a request for an immediate temporary injunction to prevent any further transfer or encumbrance on the property, a legal belt added to the suspenders of the lis pendens. The judge, reviewing the mountain of preliminary evidence we attached, the police report, the fraudulent deed, my travel records, granted it the same day. There was no hearing, there was no argument. The evidence spoke for itself, and the court's first action was to build a legal fortress around my ownership while the facts were officially entered into the record. The first document we formally submitted was the sworn affidavit from the forensic document examiner. It was a masterpiece of scientific certainty, a dry, academic, and utterly devastating dismantling of their core piece of evidence. Reading it was like watching a surgeon dissect a tumor. She had included magnified images, side-by-side comparisons of the letter R charts illustrating the variances in pen pressure. Her conclusion, stated in the flat, emotionless language of her profession, was that the signature on the quitclaim deed was a high-quality freehand simulation that failed to replicate the subconscious, dynamic characteristics of the genuine author. It is, with the highest degree of scientific certainty, a forgery. We filed it with the court. The cornerstone of their fraud was now officially dust. Next came the video evidence. The state investigator's office had successfully subpoenaed the security footage from the 24-hour print shop. My attorney was provided a copy. It was as clear and damning as I had hoped. The video, time-stamped and synced with the shop's transaction logs, showed Chloe Ronson entering the shop alone. It showed her looking nervous, repeatedly checking her phone. It showed her presenting the deed and a driver's license to the notary, her hand trembling slightly. The investigator's report, which accompanied the video file, included an even more elegant piece of modern forensics. They had subpoenaed the notary's rideshare records for that night. The GPS data from his Uber pickup and drop-off confirmed his presence at that location. at that precise time, corroborating his logbook and the video. We filed the video file and the investigator's report with the court. The ghost who signed my name now had a face, a time, and a location, all logged and verified. Then we attacked the pretext for the crime, the fake HOA lien. My attorney deposed the treasurer of our homeowners association, a retired accountant named Mr. Abernathy. In a sworn statement, he confirmed that no such emergency assessment had ever been levied, that my account was in perfect standing, and that the signature on the lien notice was not his. Our own analysis, which we included as an exhibit, showed that the signature had been clumsily lifted from a welcome letter he had signed, scanned, and pasted onto the fraudulent document. We even noted that the date on the form was typed in Calibri, while the rest of the HOA's official documents used Times New Roman. It was an amateurish cut-and-paste job, another sign of their arrogance and haste. We filed the deposition and our analysis. The fabricated justification for their theft was now officially exposed as a lie. The most significant blow came from the court itself. In response to our petition, the judge issued an order compelling Stoneloom Holdings LLC to disclose its beneficial owners. A shell company can hide an identity from the public, but it cannot hide it from a judge. Gavin's attorney filed a motion to quash, arguing that the ownership was confidential. The judge denied it in less than an hour. Faced with contempt of court, they had no choice. A one-page document was filed with the clerk, an addendum to the LLC's Articles of Organization. It listed a single member, a single owner, with a 100% stake in the company. The name on the document was Gavin T. Vale. He was no longer a phantom G. Vale. He was named. He was exposed. He was legally bound to the criminal enterprise. That evening, I received an email. The sender was Marla. The subject line was simply, "Please." "Rowan," the email began. "I know you're angry. I know I messed up. This has all gone too far. Gavin he's not who I thought he was. He's panicking. Can we please just talk? Not with lawyers, just us. We can fix this. I know we can." It was a pathetic, desperate appeal to a history she herself had set on fire. She was trying to drag this back into the messy, emotional realm of family, where the lines are blurry and guilt can be weaponized. She was looking for a back door, a negotiated surrender. She still didn't understand the game we were playing. I was not interested in fixing this. I was interested in finishing it. I typed my reply. It was 2 sentences. "All future communications should be directed to my attorney. I will see you in court." I hit send. There was no hesitation, no remorse, just the clean, quiet finality of a door being locked for the last time. The end came not in a packed and dramatic courtroom, but in the quiet, mundane setting of the county clerk's office a week later. The judge, having reviewed the uncontested and overwhelming evidence, had issued a summary judgment in my favor. The final order was a simple directive to the clerk of the court to expunge the fraudulent deed. My attorney and I stood before a counter, a plexiglass shield separating us from a clerk who looked profoundly bored by the whole affair. She took the judge's order, typed something into her computer, and then pulled a heavy book-bound ledger from a shelf behind her. She located the page where the quitclaim deed had been recorded. She then took out a large, old-fashioned rubber stamp and a red ink pad. With a motion born of endless repetition, she pressed the stamp into the ink and then brought it down hard on the page, right over the record of the deed. The sound was a dull, percussive thump that echoed slightly in the quiet office. She lifted the stamp. There, in stark, red letters, was a single word, void. She then turned to her computer and, with a few clicks, officially recorded the judge's order, nullifying the transaction in the digital record. "It's done," she said, not looking up. "The title is reverted to the previous recording. It's as if it never happened." We walked out into the afternoon sun. My lawyer was pleased. Talking about filing motions to recover legal fees, I barely heard him. I was holding the certified copy of the judge's order in my hand. It felt solid, real, but the feeling inside me was not one of triumph. There was no surge of joy, no feeling of release. The victory was cold, clean, and quiet. It was the feeling of a complex audit being completed, of a ledger being balanced, of a system being restored to its correct state. It was truth with a notary stamp and a case number. It wasn't a celebration. It was a closing entry. I had the locks changed back that afternoon. The locksmith, a cheerful man who was entirely unaware of the drama that had transpired, whistled as he worked. When he was done, he handed me a set of new, gleaming keys. They felt solid, definitive. I walked up my own front steps and slid the key into the new lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click, the sound of a world being set right. She was waiting for me, sitting on the bottom step of the porch, looking small and lost. She must have been watching, waiting for the locksmith to leave. She didn't look like the confident, radiant woman from the Norwood bar. The silk blouse was wrinkled now, and her face was pale, stripped of its defiant makeup. She looked like my little sister again, and for a dangerous second, a ghost of old affection stirred in me. I crushed it before it could take hold. I didn't invite her in. I simply stood on the porch, a few feet above her, the new keys in my hand. "The locks are different," she said, her voice thin and reedy. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. She looked up at me, her eyes welling with tears she had clearly been holding back. "I just wanted it to be fair. Rowan," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "That's all I ever wanted. You had everything. You always had everything. The perfect job, the perfect house, Mom and Dad's approval. It all came so easily to you. I just wanted one thing that wasn't a hand-me-down from your perfect life. I wanted it to feel fair." It was the story she had been telling herself for 20 years, a narrative of victimhood so deeply ingrained it had become her truth. In her version of reality, she was the aggrieved party, taking what was rightfully hers. I had expected this. I had prepared for it. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. The time for emotional debate was long past. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I opened it and held it out to her. It was a copy of the bank statement from Stoneloom's frozen account, showing the line item for the suspended wire transfer. The recipient name was clearly printed, Marla Price. The amount was there, a precise 3.5% of the fraudulent sale price, her success fee. Her eyes darted over the numbers, her breath catching in her throat. Before she could form a response, I reached back into my bag and pulled out a second piece of paper. This one was a printout of an email. Ben, my friend from IT Forensics, had helped me recover it from the company's servers. It had been sent from Marla's personal account to Gavin's private one, 2 days before my trip. The subject line was, "Final check." The body of the email contained a single, chilling sentence. "Make sure she's out of town long enough for the deed to record clear. I don't want any surprises." I held the paper out. She didn't take it. She just stared at the words. Her own words, damning her in black and white. This wasn't a cry for fairness. This was a cold, calculated instruction. This was conspiracy. The last of her composure shattered. The carefully constructed narrative of the wronged sister evaporated, leaving only the raw, ugly truth of her greed. She broke. A gut-wrenching sob tore from her chest, and she doubled over, wrapping her arms around herself. "Please, Rowan," she wept, the words choked and desperate. "Please don't make this a bigger deal. It was a mistake. I was stupid. He talked me into it. Please, don't ruin my life. Don't send me to jail. Please." She was begging me to erase her choices, to undo the consequences she had so eagerly sought. I looked down at my own hands, the day I'd stood locked out on the sidewalk. They had trembled with rage and shock. Now, they were perfectly still. The storm inside me had passed, leaving behind a profound and unsettling calm. The emotional fever had broken. I let her cry for a long moment, the sounds echoing in the quiet afternoon. Then I stepped down and unhooked a single key from my new key ring. It was the key to the small guest house in the back, above the detached garage. I bent down and placed it in her hand, closing her trembling fingers around it. "You need a place to stay tonight," I said, my voice devoid of anger or pity or anything at all. The guest house is clean. There are blankets in the closet. She stopped crying, her head snapping up. Her face was a mess of confusion, her tear-filled eyes wide with disbelief. She was expecting a screaming match, a final, dramatic severing. She was expecting righteous fury. She was not expecting this quiet, practical, and deeply humiliating act of mercy. The gesture was both a reprieve and a judgment, a small kindness that only highlighted the enormity of her betrayal. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was trapped between gratitude and shame, and I had no intention of helping her find a way out. I stood up and turned to walk away. Over my shoulder, I sent one last text message to her phone, a final closing entry for our shared history. "Kindness isn't forgiveness," it read. "It's a boundary." I walked toward my front door, not looking back. Behind me, the lawn was quiet, the grass green and unmarked. The sold sign was gone, a ghost that had been exorcised by the relentless application of facts. The afternoon breeze was dry and cool, and in my mind, I could feel it flipping through the pages of a file, one by one, until it reached the final page and came to a quiet, definitive close. The next morning, I walked back into the Skyview auditorium. The company had called another all-hands meeting, this one unscheduled, with a mandatory attendance policy. The mood was vastly different from the day before. The air wasn't humming with casual chatter. It was thick with tension, speculation, and a kind of nervous energy. I took the same seat in the third row, in the front row, where the executive team sat. There was a conspicuous, deliberate gap. Gavin Vale's chair was empty. Elizabeth Cho walked onto the stage alone. She stood at the podium, and a hush fell over the 500 employees. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "As of this morning," she announced, her voice resonating with cool authority, "Gavin Vale is no longer an employee of Maryland North. Effective immediately, the board has appointed an interim CFO, and a formal search for a permanent replacement will begin next week. We are cooperating fully with law enforcement on an ongoing investigation. Our corporate integrity is paramount, and we will act decisively to protect it." She paused, and her eyes scanned the crowd until they found mine. "Yesterday, one of our own demonstrated that integrity under extreme personal and professional duress. Rowan Price's actions, while unorthodox, were a testament to the ethical standards we demand of ourselves. On behalf of the board and this entire company, I want to thank her for her courage and her commitment to doing what is right." A polite, then growing, wave of applause filled the room. People turned to look at me. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. I simply gave Elizabeth a short, single nod of acknowledgement. The applause was for them, not for me. It was the sound of a system reassuring itself, of a corporation publicly reaffirming its values after a near-fatal breach. My actions had never been about upholding the company's honor. They had been about dismantling a personal betrayal with the most effective tools at my disposal. Those tools just happened to belong to the company. Elizabeth gestured toward me. "Rowan, would you like to say anything?" I stood and walked to the podium one last time. The crowd quieted, anticipating a speech, a story, a victim's triumphant statement. I gave them none of that. I reached for the remote, my remote, and clicked it. The screen behind me, which had been displaying the company logo, went white, and then, in the center, a single sentence appeared in stark, black, sans serif font. "Risk is a story people tell themselves. Facts are the ending." I didn't say a word. I let the sentence hang in the silent auditorium. A final, cold lesson in my own particular field of expertise. I placed the remote on the podium, turned, and walked back to my seat. I picked up my laptop, closed it, and without looking back at the stage or the audience, I began to walk out of the auditorium. As I reached the aisle, the applause started again. This time it wasn't polite. It was a roar, a rolling wave of sound, a release of the tension that had been building for 24 hours. It sounded like hail on a tin roof. I didn't acknowledge it. It was the soundtrack to the end of their story. My story had already finished. I pushed open the doors and walked out, leaving the noise and the judgment and the corporate drama behind me. Outside, the Florida sun was bright, almost painfully so. Parked in the executive visitor spot near the main entrance was a dark, unmarked sedan, the same kind I had seen in the lobby the day before, an investigator's car, a quiet, physical reminder of the consequences that were still unfolding for Gavin and Marla. The sky above was a brilliant, cloudless, and completely indifferent blue. It didn't care about justice or betrayal or victory. It was just a fact. I drove home, not to the co-working space, not to a hotel, but home. I didn't rush. I didn't play music. I just drove, watching the familiar landscape of Clearwater slide by. When I pulled into my driveway, the lawn looked pristine, untouched. The crooked hole from the realty sign was gone, as if it had never been there. I walked up the front path, slid my new key into the lock, and the door opened with a quiet, familiar click. The house smelled of fresh paint and new wood and possibility. It smelled like mine. I walked through the silent rooms, my footsteps echoing slightly in the empty space. Everything was exactly as I had left it. It was a sanctuary, a fortress, a fact. On the mantelpiece above the fireplace, I set down the one thing I had brought with me from my lawyer's office. It wasn't a framed picture or a souvenir. It was a small, stiff, cream-colored card from the Pinellas County Court. I stood it up, leaning it against the cool marble. It had the court's official seal embossed at the top, and beneath it, the case number and two simple, powerful words. Quiet title, granted. I stepped back, looking at the card. It was my trophy, a declaration of an undisputed fact. My victory wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It was a piece of paper, backed by the full weight of the law. I leaned against the opposite wall, the cool plaster a grounding presence at my back. I looked around the room, at the way the afternoon light streamed through the windows I had chosen, casting long shadows across the floors I had paid for. A small smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of happiness or relief. It was a smile of completion. The kind of smile a risk analyst makes when the final data point comes in, and the model is proven correct. The game was over. No final words, no looking back. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to see where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. And for extra support, hit that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.